Hello again, everybody, and God be with you. Another story from the Bible, Baddies. Last week's story was about Ahab and Jezebel, two pretty nasty people. And it won't, I suppose, surprise you very much to know that their daughter was much the same. So let's read The Wicked Granny's Tale. And this is how Bob Hartman introduces it, as usual. My grandmother was pretty typical as far as grannies go. She filled me up with sweets and cake and sugared cereal. She bought me far too many Christmas presents. And when I slept overnight at her house, she let me stay up well past my bedtime and watch scary movies. She was also, for a very short time, one of my Sunday school teachers. And all I can imagine is that her passion for those Saturday night mummy and monster movies must have spilled over into her Sunday mornings, because she loved telling the most bloodthirsty Bible stories. Yes, that's when I first heard about Eglon in his sucking stomach, Samson in his crushing strength, and Judas with his bowels gushing all over the ground. And I didn't even know what a bowel was at the time. I just loved the way my grandmother said it. Then, of course, there were the inevitable stories about Ahab, the evil Israelite king, and his foreign wife Jezebel, who taught God's people all about the strange idols in her homeland and persecuted the prophet Elijah, and whose blood was lapped up by the dogs when she died. And finally, there was Athaliah, the daughter of this wicked couple, who murdered her own grandchildren to gain control of the throne. A wicked granny? An evil grandma? It seemed a strange thing, especially coming from my own grandmother's lips. Did it have any effect on me? Well, let's just say that from that time on, I looked a little more suspiciously at the frosted flakes she fed me. And when those scary movies were over, I insisted on sleeping with the lights on and my back right against the wall. So here's the story. Sweet and gentle, wise and kind, kitchens rich with the smell of fresh-baked treats. That's what grannies are like. But Athaliah was not your typical granny. She was cruel and ambitious, deceitful and sly, and she had never baked a biscuit in her life. Evil plots were her speciality, and she cooked one up the moment she heard that her son, the king, was dead. She gathered her guards around her. She whispered the recipe in their ears. And even though they were used to violence and to war, they could not hide the horror in their eyes. Yes, I know they're my grandsons, Athaliah sneered, but I want you to kill them so that I am sure to inherit the throne. Athaliah was not your typical granny, and she hadn't been much of a mother either. So perhaps that is why her daughter, Jehosheba, was not surprised when she peeped into the hallway and saw soldiers marching, swords drawn, towards the nursery door. Jehosheba had a choice. She could rush to the nursery and throw herself in front of her little nephews and be killed along with them more likely than not. Or she could creep back into the room from which she'd just come and try to save the king's youngest son, Joash, the baby she'd been playing with when she heard the soldiers pass. The screams from the nursery answered her question. She was already too late, and she cursed the palace guards for their speed and efficiency. Speed was what she needed as well, for she could hear the guards' voices coming her way. Did we get them all? We'd better get them all. The Queen will have our heads if we miss one. And so they burst into each room, one by one, down the long palace hall. And Jehosheba just had time to wrap her hand around the baby's mouth and duck into a cupboard. Don't cry, she prayed as the soldiers grunted and shuffled around the room. Please don't cry. No one here, someone said at last. But Jehosheba stayed in that cupboard, still as a statue, long after they had left the room. Then she wrapped up the baby in an old blanket and bundled him off to her home near the temple. Athaliah stared sternly at her soldiers. So you killed them? Every last one? She asked. Every last one, they grunted back. Athaliah's stare turned into an evil grin. Then tell me about it, she ordered, and don't leave out one tiny detail. When the guards had finished their story, Athaliah sent them out of the room. Then she tossed her head and cackled. At last, at last, at last! Queen of Judah, mother of the nation. That has a nice ring to it. And my parents would be so proud. Jehosheba's husband, Jehoiada, however, had a very different reaction. Well, what do you expect? He fumed when Jehosheba told him about the murder of their nephews. With a father like Ahab and a mother like Jezebel. But I'm her daughter, Jehosheba protested. You don't mean to say... No, Jehoiada assured her as he wrapped his arms around his wife. I didn't mean that at all. You are a wonderful mother, a good woman who trusts in the God of Israel. And because of your love and courage, little Joash here is still alive. The true ruler of Judah, Jehosheba added, if only the people knew. You're the high priest. Perhaps you could tell them. Even if they knew, they would do nothing, Jehoiada sighed. Athaliah is much too powerful, and they are still entranced by the false god she worships. No, we must wait until they have seen through her evil ways. Then, and only then, dare we show this little fellow to them. Meanwhile, we shall hide him here, in the high priest's quarters, in the temple of our God, for this is the last place your wicked mother will want to come. 1 year passed, and while little Joash learned to crawl and then to walk, his evil grandmother was busy murdering anyone who dared to take a step against her. 2 years passed, and as Joash spoke his first words and toddled around the temple, Athaliah sang the praises of the false god Baal and offered him the blood of human sacrifice. 3 years, 4 years, 5 years passed, and as Joash grew into a little boy, the people of Judah grew tired of Athaliah's evil ways. 6 years passed, and when Joash was finally old enough to understand who he was, Jehoiada decided that the time had come to tell the nation as well. We must be very careful, he explained to his wife. The palace guards are finally on our side, but your mother still has some support among the people. We mustn't show our hand too soon. So how will you do it? Jehosheba asked. On the Sabbath. It is the usual custom for 2/3 of the palace guard to stay at the temple while the others return to the palace to protect the queen. Tomorrow, however, the bodyguards will leave as expected, but they will not go to the palace. Instead, they will return to the temple by another route and help to protect young Joash should anything happen. Ah, Jehosheba smiled. So Joash will be surrounded by the entire palace guard, while my mother will be left with no soldiers to carry out her orders. Exactly, Jehoiada grinned back. When the Sabbath came, the people gathered in the temple as usual to worship the God of Israel. But there was nothing usual about what happened at the end of the service. Jehoiada, the high priest, led a little boy out in front of the crowd. Then he placed a crown on that little boy's head. And while the palace guards gathered round the child, the high priest shouted, "Behold, people of Judah, behold your true king, Joash, son of Ahaziah." All was silent for a moment, and then someone cheered. Someone else joined in, and soon the cheering filled the temple and echoed from there to the palace, where Athaliah was waiting and wondering what had happened to her guards. She was old and frail now, but as wicked and as stubborn as ever. "What's going on? What's all the noise about?" she muttered as she hobbled out of the palace and across to the temple. "Out of my way! Get out of my way!" she ordered, and the crowd parted before her. And that's when something caught her eye, a glint, the gleaming from the little king's crown. "What's the meaning of this?" she glared. "This looks like treason to me." "Not treason, Athaliah," said the high priest, "but the true king of Judah, restored to his rightful throne, Joash, your grandson." "My grandson?" Athaliah shuddered. "But I thought, I mean, my soldiers, they told me—" "That they had murdered them all?" asked Jehoiada. "Is that what you meant to say? Well, in their haste to fulfill your wicked ambition, they missed one. The one who stands before you now, the true king of Judah." "Treason!" shouted the old woman again, but her words were stifled by the palace guards, who quickly surrounded her. "Where are we going? What are you doing?" she demanded to know as they led her away. "I'm an old woman, a grandmother. Don't push me." "Don't worry, Granny," one of the guards whispered in her ear. "This won't take long. Remember what you had us do to your grandsons all those years ago? Well, we're going to do the same thing to you now." Athaliah shrieked, but only the guards heard her final cry, for the crowds were still cheering for Athaliah's grandson and for the end of her wicked reign. Well, mother and father, Ahab and Jezebel, weren't very good, and neither was Athaliah. But I think the rest of the family saw the evil ways and changed, and Joash was a good king. Well, that's this week's story. I hope you keep safe, and I'll see you next week with another story from Bible Baddies. God be with you.